South Korea. In 2006, South Korean officials had a dream: build a $264 million circuit on marshland in Yeongam, a rural area 320 kilometers from Seoul. An entire city would grow around it. Hotels, restaurants, tourism, the next Monaco, the next Singapore. That's what the brochures said. What they got was a construction site that doubled as a racetrack. The Korea International Circuit was so far behind schedule that the FIA had to waive its standard 90-day approval rule. Race director Charlie Whiting showed up just 11 days before the inaugural race and gave it a barely passing grade of satisfactory. When the F1 paddock arrived in October 2010, cranes were still standing in the infield. Mud served as runoff. There were unfinished grandstands. And then it rained hard. The accommodation situation became an international embarrassment. With no hotels nearby, F1 teams, media, and VIPs were stuffed into local love motels, the kind that rent by the hour and have vending machines for adult products in the lobby. That made global headlines. Not the kind Korea wanted. Getting there was a nightmare. Fans faced 12-hour round-trip bus rides from Seoul. The shuttle system was chaos. After races, people waited hours for buses that never came. Fernando Alonso famously tweeted from Japan just hours after a Korean race, basically saying he'd already moved on before the track could cool down. The actual racing was decent. Tilke designed a solid circuit with 2 long straights and sweeping corners. Alonso won the first race. Vettel dominated the next 3. But nobody came to watch. Attendance averaged about 40% of the 135,000 capacity. Financial losses crossed $150 million over 4 years. The promised city around the track never materialized. The organizers tried to renegotiate fees with Ecclestone. He refused. By 2014, Korea was off the calendar. The circuit sits abandoned today. Rusted grandstands, vegetation growing through cracks in the asphalt, a $264 million monument to what happens when ambition outruns reality. India. Their story is different. The track was actually brilliant. The Bud International Circuit in Greater Noida cost $400 million to build, was designed by Hermann Tilke, and drivers loved it. Sebastian Vettel called it a roller coaster. It had elevation changes of up to 10%, a massive pit lane, and corners that drew comparisons to Spa. Vettel won all 3 Indian Grand Prix from pole. He clinched his 4th consecutive championship there in 2013. The track was world-class. The problem was everything around it. Plans for an Indian Grand Prix first surfaced in 1997. Multiple cities competed. Hyderabad, Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi, all fell through because of government disinterest. When Greater Noida finally won, the JP Group, a private company, took on the entire financial burden of building an F1-grade facility. That's a job governments handle in most countries. JP shouldered it alone. Then came the tax fight. The state of Uttar Pradesh, under Chief Minister Akhilesh Yadav, classified Formula One not as a sport, but as entertainment. That meant no tax exemptions. Customs fees on engines, tires, and equipment stayed sky high. Every team that shipped their cars to India got hit with massive import duties. On top of that, the hosting fees to Formula One management were crushing. The math simply didn't work. JP couldn't recover its investment. After 3 races, the Grand Prix took a sabbatical in 2014. Ecclestone said it would return in 2015, then 2016, then never. The total losses for JP crossed $25 million on top of the construction cost. The circuit was eventually sealed by authorities over unpaid dues. Today, the Bud International Circuit sits mostly dormant, a $400 million ghost track. MotoGP tried to come in 2023. That lasted 1 year before it was also canceled over unpaid fees. India's problem was never the circuit. It was a government that refused to treat international motorsport as anything more than a cash grab. Turkey, they actually did it right, twice, and still lost. Istanbul Park opened in 2005, and its turn 8 immediately became the stuff of legend. A multi-apex left-hander taken flat out at over 270 kilometers per hour, pulling nearly 5G through the corner. Drivers called it the best corner in Formula One. The circuit was one of Tilke's finest, fast, flowing, and brutal on tires. The first Turkish Grand Prix in 2005 drew strong crowds. Kimi Räikkönen won. The next year, Felipe Massa took his first ever F1 victory there. In 2010, Mark Webber and Vettel crashed into each other while fighting for the lead. Iconic moments on an iconic track. The racing was always good, but the money wasn't. Turkey's government was subsidizing the hosting fees. When the economy slowed, the subsidies dried up. Attendance dropped. Ecclestone wanted his full fee. Turkey couldn't pay. After 2011, the race was gone. Then COVID happened. In 2020, with half the calendar canceled, Turkey got a call. Come back. They said yes immediately. Lewis Hamilton won the race in miserable wet conditions, clinching his 7th world championship. It was one of the most memorable drives of his career. Turkey returned again in 2021, replacing Singapore. Another great race. Attendance hit 190,000 over the weekend. But once the pandemic calendar normalized, Turkey was dropped again. They've been lobbying to return ever since. In 2024, FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem met with Turkish President Erdogan to discuss bringing the race back. So far, nothing. Istanbul Park has one of the best layouts on Earth, sits in one of the world's most accessible cities, and produced some of F1's best racing. And it still can't get a permanent spot on the calendar. Turkey's crime wasn't failure. It was being too expensive in a sport that always has someone willing to pay more. Vietnam. Their Grand Prix never happened. Not a single lap was completed. And that might be the most embarrassing entry on this list. In November 2018, Liberty Media announced the Vietnamese Grand Prix. It would be held on a street circuit in Hanoi designed by Tilke. The deal was a multi-year contract, part of Liberty's grand plan to expand F1 into new Asian markets. The circuit was a hybrid layout, part public road, part purpose-built. Construction moved forward. The track was nearly complete by early 2020. Then COVID hit. The inaugural race, scheduled for April 5th, 2020, was postponed, then canceled. Fine. Every race was getting canceled that year. The plan was to reschedule for 2021. But then, something far worse than a virus killed the Vietnam Grand Prix. Nguyen Duc Trung, the chairman of the Hanoi People's Committee and one of the key political figures behind the race, was arrested on corruption charges, completely unrelated to F1. But it didn't matter. The man who championed the project, who pushed it through the political system, who made the promises, was now sitting in a prison cell. He was eventually sentenced to 10 years. Without its political sponsor, the Vietnamese Grand Prix collapsed. It was removed from the 2021 calendar. Liberty Media's financial disclosures showed a payment related to the cancellation of the Vietnam contract. The half-built street circuit in Hanoi sits unused. The grandstands were never finished. No F1 car ever turned a wheel there. The irony is brutal. Even Bernie Ecclestone had been skeptical about Vietnam, warning that the failures of Korea and India should serve as cautionary tales. Liberty Media pushed ahead anyway. COVID was the bullet, but corruption pulled the trigger. Indonesia. They have been flirting with Formula One since the early 2000s, and every single attempt has ended in nothing. The most serious push came around the planned Jakarta Aprix and the broader ambition to host a proper F1 race. In 2022, Indonesia successfully hosted the MotoGP at the Mandalika International Street Circuit on Lombok. That was supposed to be the springboard. If we can handle MotoGP, F1 would be next. But the MotoGP race itself was plagued by issues. The track surface broke up in the heat. Riders complained about dangerous conditions. The organizational execution was shaky. Multiple proposals for an F1 street circuit in Jakarta circulated for years. There were concept designs, government feasibility studies, and optimistic press conferences from politicians. But none of it ever got past the talking stage. The hosting fees alone are in the range of $60 to $70 million per year. Indonesia wanted the prestige, but struggled to justify the cost, especially when infrastructure investment could go toward roads, schools, and hospitals. There was also no domestic motorsport culture strong enough to sustain an F1 audience. No Indonesian driver has ever raced in Formula One. The country has 270 million people, a massive young population, and genuine enthusiasm for motorsport. But translating that into filling grandstands for a $300 weekend ticket is a different challenge entirely. As of 2026, Indonesia still has no confirmed F1 deal. The calendar is packed at 24 races. There's no room unless someone else drops off. Indonesia's dream of hosting Formula One hasn't died. It just never actually lived. South Africa. They are the oldest failure on this list, and in some ways the saddest, because they didn't just fail at Formula One. They were banned from it. The South African Grand Prix was a mainstay of the calendar from 1962 to 1985, held at the Kyalami Circuit near Johannesburg. It produced legendary races. Jody Scheckter, South Africa's only F1 champion, won the 1979 world title. Nigel Mansell won a famous race there in 1985. The track was fast, dangerous, and loved by drivers, but apartheid was tearing the country apart. International sporting boycotts were squeezing South Africa out of global competition. By the mid-1980s, the political pressure was too much. F1 left after 1985. It came back briefly in 1992 and 1993 after the end of apartheid. Mansell won in 1992, Prost in 1993, but by then, Ecclestone was chasing bigger money in Asia and the Middle East. South Africa couldn't compete financially. After 1993, the race disappeared for good. Since then, there have been endless attempts to bring F1 back. Kyalami was bought and rebuilt. Cape Town proposed a street circuit. In the early 2000s, Stefano Domenicali, the F1 CEO, repeatedly stated that Africa was a priority market. There were serious talks. Optimistic timelines were floated. A race in South Africa by 2025 or 2026 was discussed. None of it happened. The hosting fees are enormous. Government funding has been inconsistent. The economic realities of South Africa, with high unemployment, infrastructure challenges, and competing national priorities, made the investment hard to justify politically. F1 has 24 races now. Every slot is locked down by countries willing to write massive checks. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Las Vegas. South Africa can't compete in that arena. The continent of Africa, with 1.4 billion people, has no Formula One race. The last one was in 1993, over 30 years ago. Kyalami sits ready. The fans are there. The circuit exists. But the money doesn't add up. And in Formula One, that's the only equation that matters.